to Season 3, Episode 8 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Karl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today by my esteemed colleague, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
Esteemed.
Esteemed. So I thought I'd use a new word.
Oh dear. I'm all right. I'm okay. I can't complain on balance.
Do you like esteemed? Should we use it again?
I don't know.
New word for me. I don't want
to. That's absolutely thrown you, hasn't it? So
it's my colleague John Goodall Esquire. Like,
we give you some letters after your name if you like.
And none are fit for polite company.
Or how about we go American and introduce you as lead cloud engineer John Goodall III?
First of his name.
Anyway, moving on. I'd also like to introduce our special guest for today, Ben Pyle, who's joining us from the US. Ben is a fellow AWS Community Builder. How are you doing today, Ben?
I'm good. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're listening in from.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Ben. What do you do for a living?
Yeah, so I'm a CTO at a healthcare company that is building electronic medical records. So keeping track of patient data, patient information, doctor visits, all of that information. So 100% AWS, 99.8% serverless. Don't ask me how I came up with that metric, but it's pretty close to accurate.
Like all good statistics made up on the spot.
Yes, on the spot. It'd be 98.7 if we were to do this in an hour from now.
So are you a community builder in the serverless category?
I am. I'm in the serverless. So I joined in 2023, anxiously applied for 2024. So hopefully good vibes. But so I've been in the program for about going on 12 months, which is fantastic.
Nice. So you're hoping for the backpack on renewal?
I got the backpack on a side quest that I went on earlier in the year, and it's pretty fantastic. So
nice.
You're making Karl jealous because this is his second stab at the backpack now,
and you still haven't got the backpack. It's a really nice backpack. Well, I won't reach and pull it up here in a minute. If that's
I do have the user group. I have it down here. I'm not going to pull it up either because I'll probably end up knocking my microphone. But I have the user group leader backpack, which I think is of a similar quality. So I won't be too disappointed if I don't achieve the backpack. But I am, as I've said many times on the podcast, I'm a year one community builder for the second year. So I did not get renewed, but I got accepted again. And I really wish I'd kept a note of what I put on the successful application because I can't remember and I'm having to start all over again. But it's all good fun. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us today, Ben. As regular listeners to the podcast will know, once a week I collate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John and I choose a subset of the articles from the newsletter that we'd like to talk about with our guests in a little bit more detail. So we've got a selection of articles this week. And the first article is more of an announcement, really, rather than a full article. But there's some new features that have been announced for AWS Control Tower. And the title of the article is AWS Control Tower introduces APIs to register organizational units. So we're just having a little chat in the preamble. I'm not sure that anybody on this episode today is actually a user of Control Tower, but of course we all know what it is, and we probably all use different things to achieve similar results. But John, tell me your thoughts about this announcement.
This is interesting. It's more in the vibes that we're getting post reinvent for Control Tower, that it's getting a lot more attention. Excuse me. As a company, one of the things that we've been working on internally and that I've been spending an awful lot of my life doing is building some tooling that allows us to do org management without using Control Tower for reasons. It's slow. You can only use it in the console. It's quite opaque. You can't drive it through code, so on and so on and so on. This is going some way to remediating some of those concerns because this is API endpoints that let you do things that were previously only available in the console. Mm-hmm. Now, the reality of that is those API endpoints will have existed anyway, but they just wouldn't have been documented or publicly available because the console's going to use the APIs. Let's be realistic here. But this is good, generally. More publicly available APIs means things like maybe CloudFormation, but probably not. Things like Terraform and your nasty code can interface with Control Tower programmatically. So you don't have to sit there watching it do stuff and then fall over. You can tell it to do stuff and then fall over without you having to sit and watch it. So this is good. We like this. It's a reasonably basic change, though. To be honest, it's just enabling OUs. So an OU, for listeners that aren't familiar with orgs, is an organizational unit, and it's a way of logically grouping accounts together. So in landing zones that we deploy as a company, we have things like production workloads and non-production workloads and compliance accounts for your security tools and your logs and that kind of thing. So that would be an OU. And all this is doing is it's making sure that you can register OUs programmatically, which is great. Why do you want to do that? Well, you can apply controls to OUs so that you're only applying, say, restrictive controls to production, and your controls on your development workloads are a little bit more flexible, or potentially the other way around, so that you're saying, outside of production, I only want to use really tiny instances, please. So you can start to do things like that. And it's nice that Control Tower is saying that you can now do this in a more automated provisioning workflow rather than sitting there with the console, which no one likes doing.
What are your thoughts on this one, Ben? I know you're not a particular user of Control Tower, but
I kind of too, like I run one simple organization that's we've got I think 10 different accounts that we manage up underneath our main org, and so from a initial creation standpoint, right, like unless you're creating these things all the time, I don't see a ton of value, but I do see value in being able to refine your organizations and definitions and applying Control Tower to things that already exist, right? And I think that's something that I know, looking back at like when we launched 8 years ago, I wish we would have really kind of kept up with, because we do a lot of organizational management through console and clicks, and don't have a ton of automation around it. And I would imagine that a lot of people have probably the same challenge. And so I feel like I need to catch up, so to speak, on kind of some of where this is going. So I loved hearing John's thoughts on kind of some of the use cases that they were looking at.
Yeah, I mean, as a service provider, we manage a lot of orgs for a lot of customers. I've deployed, so we use Org Formation, which is an open source project, which solves for a lot of that, because it just basically runs CloudFormation plus a bit, and you could do it in pipelines, and you could do full GitOps, and it's brilliant. So it solves for a lot of that. Initial setup is awful, but yeah, as you say, once you've got that first organization dealt with, unless you're having to regularly make changes to things, it's not something you touch very often. It's much more useful for, say, my use case than for most people that aren't sitting across multiple organizations.
We definitely get drift though between our setups. And so, I mean, one of the things I was going to take away from any of this was that I need to get with my ops team to look into how we can better manage and look at applying some of these techniques and APIs against our current build.
Nice. I'm sure your ops team are going to be happy to hear of that incoming workload.
They always love it when I show up on things and then announce publicly to the entire world that there's going to be work coming their way. Like,
I've had an idea. Go and deliver this for me, please.
Yes, and I announced it publicly.
Nice. No pressure. Anyway, on that note, let's move along to our second article for this week, which is all about AWS CodePipeline. So this is an article from the AWS DevOps blog, and the title is AWS CodePipeline adds support for branch-based development and Monorepos. And I'm going to come to you first on this one, Ben, because I know you mentioned this is something that you are interested in. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I may be one of the very few all-in code commit, code build, code pipeline, code deploy. Like, we're 100% code everything. No GitHub, which sounds probably pretty foreign.
Shocking.
I know, no GitHub. So first off, my initial responses were there was no support for code commit out of the box, which kind of gave me like this sad state internally initially. But I know that they're working on some of those pieces. What I do like about it is we've got pipelines currently for hotfix branches. We've got our main deploy pipeline, right, where we're doing any kind of main development. And then we've got some Monorepo stuff that we wrote, some really gnarly Lambdas that deal with check-ins and determining branches and trying to figure out how to kick that off. And I love getting rid of code that I don't have to support anymore. So I'm excited to be able to truncate code that we're doing to support Monorepos, lean into this feature. And like I said, now I can start killing pipelines that just manage, hey, I got a hotfix branch. And the whole, hang on, I need to reset this pipeline to now it's back to main and now it's not on the hotfix. And to be able to pick up branch-based deploys And I even was reading, it looks like it does, you can run them in parallel, which was kind of cool. And I don't know 100% how this works. Maybe you do, John, because I haven't looked at it much yet. But like one of the things that's always a pain is, hey, engineering team, we're going to go into the hotfix deploy. So guess what? Nothing can go to development for the next 8 hours while we test this hotfix, right? So to be able to run in parallel, that would be pretty cool, because then I can keep regular development going while we're also looking at shipping something that we probably should have fixed earlier in the deploy cycle. So that's my general, like, I'm really excited about this one because it feels like a nice step forward, something that probably should have always been there, but like at the same time, that's kind of one of the pros and cons of being in a, super tightly coupled to a cloud provider, is you get all the benefits as they get released. And so it's never 100% in day one.
Yeah, this is absolutely a tool that I think I saw a very spicy take that said this would have been brilliant in 2018.
Yeah, when we started with CodePipeline, 2018 would have been really good early on to have this.
Yeah. So branch-based deploys and support for monorepos is not earth-shattering. It's not groundbreaking, but as you say, it takes a lot of nasty work away. And this is something that GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, even Jenkins to an extent has supported forever. Yeah. It's why did this take so long? In terms of the, what is it doing? How is it useful? You've got, for the listeners' benefit more than anything, you've got one pipeline that can handle different things depending on what branch is calling it. Brilliant. Because why is that useful? Well, if a dev branch has had a push to it, I want to deploy to my dev environment and only my dev environment, please. And I'd also like to run a bunch of tests automatically. Mm-hmm. Great. If it's had a push to a staging branch, then I want to run dev and I want to run staging. I don't want to run my unit tests, but I do want to run some integration tests against that environment. For production, I don't want to run any tests. I do want to make sure that we get a test deploy in, and I want a manual gate to say, push button, go please. And all of that is in the one pipeline, so you don't have if this branch, run this pipeline. If that branch, run that pipeline. If that branch, run that pipeline. And this is something that GitLab is the example I like to use, has been doing for a decade, I think. It's been doing it for, excuse me, a very long time. And it makes engineers' lives, like me, a lot easier, because you've only got the one thing to manage and look for and alert on and kind of all the rest of it. The parallel execution is less useful than it might first sound. What that means is it's potentially useful depending on how you're working your pipeline. What it means is executions won't stop and wait for each other. So they won't queue up and then do the next one and then the next one and then the next one. They'll just run. And that's somewhat useful depending on how you've written your pipelines. So you could have a pipeline that creates an ephemeral environment in a dev account for you, stands it up, deploys, lets you do your thing, and then gets rid of it afterwards. That means that those aren't blocked behind a production deployment, or a production deployment isn't blocked behind an ephemeral creation, for instance. But if you don't have that kind of setup, then in theory, you could just be deploying twice to the same environment at the same time and blow everything up. So it's not perfect. There is definitely a use case for it, but you've got to work with it. It doesn't just solve problems for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's kind of where I was going, was that if you've got that scenario, sure, but running, to your point, to just regular dev builds, last in wins, and that'd be kind of bad.
Yeah,
especially
that's
if
where
you
you
don't
end
have
up.
any kind of phase gates.
Yes, it's phase gating, and you end up with having to do things like, if you use Terraform, for instance, with state file locking, and then your pipelines start fighting with each other for a lock, and it's like, So it's a very useful feature. It's very useful, and I think most other providers allow you to do this as well. But by default, certainly GitLab, not about GitHub, will serialize your builds such that one must finish before the next one starts, to avoid you overwriting each other. You still have that last one in wins, but at least it's a clean deployment rather than
not
partial.
Same time. Sure, you got two CloudFormation stacks running at the same time.
Yeah, big mess.
Icky. I'm excited though. This is one that again, when been in CodePipeline since 2018, 2019. So have been kind of waiting for something like this to come out, and this feels really good. So I'm excited about it.
Nice. Well, on that note, Let's talk about AI. It wouldn't be an AWS News podcast in the current
wasn't that 2023?
I think we got plenty more AI to come right throughout 2024 and maybe beyond, but maybe the bubble will burst sooner than that. But yeah, I'm not sure we've had an episode in 2024 where we haven't spoken about AI, even though we're not huge fans of talking about AI. You just can't avoid AI if you're looking at the trade press in the moment. But this is an article on the AWS News blog announcing some new features for Amazon Bedrock, which of course is AWS's big AI play. And specifically, this article is talking about knowledge bases for Amazon Bedrock, now supporting Aurora Postgres and Cohere embedding models. John, thoughts on this one? I know you love talking about AI.
I was glad that I was number 2 because I knew you'd go back to him first on 3.
It's like a carefully executed plan.
Yes, I love it.
It's bold of you to think there's a plan. Okay. So yeah, AI is not my bag, but I wanted to talk about this because the ability to use something other than OpenSearch serverless for storing your vector databases is important. So OpenSearch serverless is really expensive. And if you had custom vector databases, now what is a vector database? A vector is basically a mathematical representation of your model. Effectively, that's the idiot's version. And being able to put it in something that isn't $700 a month starting price, chef's kiss, because Aurora Postgres is so much cheaper than OpenSearch serverless. That's the big one. And honestly, it was amazing to me that was the first thing that it supported and was the only thing that came out with at launch. Like what product person didn't think that one through? Really?
Fair enough. And what about the additional model that it supports? Anything to say on that? The Cohere embedding models?
I'm not really familiar with it, to be honest. I'm not really familiar, so no real comment. Apart from, again, another custom vector store, Pinecone serverless, just because it sounds cool.
We have a lot of pine cones in Texas.
Really?
Yeah, we have pine cones in Texas.
They're probably bigger than the pine cones that you get everywhere else.
Well, I mean, I kind of walked right into that one.
Just like everything.
Everything in Texas.
Cool. All right, let's move on to something we might have a little bit more to say about then, which is this article on data center dynamics about a new power purchase agreement that Amazon has signed with a wind farm in Oregon. So, of course, obviously, Amazon moving to, I think they already have the status as the largest purchaser of renewable energy on the planet. And this, of course, will be ticking another box against that credential. Lots of data centers in Oregon already. So interesting to see this this new power purchase agreement. And I know this is an area that you mentioned again yourself, Ben, that you were interested in or have insight into.
Yeah, so my father was a geologist, so he was an oil and gas researcher and finder. My brother is a meteorologist in the wind sector and renewable spaces. Thanksgiving was a lot of fun to hear them go back and forth of fossil fuels versus renewable energy. No, I'm interested in this because I mean I do. I've been spending a lot of time with other languages looking at sustainability. Right, spending how can I reduce my compute? How can I reduce what I'm doing in the cloud? Being real conscientious about what I'm creating. I thought Werner's keynote was really pretty poignant at reInvent last fall, where he talked a lot about frugality and cost and sustainability. I kind of look at this as I like to see Amazon making investments in renewables. Even if I had asked my dad when he was still alive, how much longer are we going to have on fossil fuels? The answer is not forever, right? We can argue about whether it's 50 years or 200 years or 300 years. It's not forever. And I'm one of those believers that we're causing damage to our ecosystem. So I love to see Amazon investing in renewables, and especially Microsoft did this years ago when they had. If you remember their submersible data center that they had, it was like they were using ocean temps to keep it cool and run it. Like I think all of these projects, the wind energy seems way more sustainable than trying to drop pods of servers in the ocean. But maybe that was. I don't know. It's kind of a feel good for me. It's one of those things that's like, I appreciate it, and I'm excited to continue to see them invest. Be curious to see if they do this beyond just Oregon. I mean, there's a lot of wind production in Texas. Our wind is bigger in Texas, if you haven't heard. And there's a lot of other places where data centers exist up and down the eastern seaboard, where there's also good wind production. That would be interesting to see if they start making investments there as well.
I'm sure the Scottish and the Dutch would disagree with that. Wind is bigger in Texas.
Wind is bigger in Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that one as well.
Having been to the Highlands, I've not been to Texas, but I've been to the Highlands. Ooh.
There's a lot of wind up there.
There's a lot of wind.
There's a lot of wind in Oklahoma as well, if you believe the song.
There is a lot of wind in Oklahoma.
I'm not about to burst into song, so
please don't.
Please don't. Yeah.
But the song's going around in my head right now, so maybe I've triggered that little e-worm for the listeners. But,
I hope not. No, this is definitely an interesting one, because whilst it's a purchase agreement, it's a repowering. So what does that mean for those of us that don't live in that bubble? Well, turbines, like everything, have a limited lifespan, and after a while the turbine themselves isn't, as far as I know, particularly reusable, renewable, any of that. It's this big lump of metal that's got a lifespan of X number of years or decades, but because of the sheer amount of force that they have to go through with all the big spinning and all the rest of it, they only last for X amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen some projects where, the blades are then reused to build bridges for like light foot traffic, because whilst they can't handle that rotation force anymore, they're still really big solid pieces of metal. But what are you going to do with all of that? This doesn't answer that, but this is refurbishing stuff that would have been at end of life anyway. So that's kind of where the money's going, it's kind of a double whammy, because it's, yes, we're going to get another, 98.4 megawatts. It's not 1.21 gigawatts. It's disappointing.
No,
but
we're not going to go back in the future.
It's not enough to power the DeLorean, but it's quite a bit of juice. So they're getting a load of renewable juice, brilliant, and they're taking things that are effectively going to be on the scrap heap and refurbishing, which is good 2.0. I suppose it's good twice.
Nice. Well, let's stick on the subject of sustainability as we talk about our final article for this week, which is not specifically about AWS. Some of it's about Amazon, some of it's about AWS. But the article is entitled 7 Ways Amazon is Using AI, again, bing, AI, to build a more sustainable future. The first one is reducing packaging use. And I've got to be honest, I'm not sure it's working, because some of the weird boxes I get from Amazon, like tiny little things in these great boxes. It's I think they need to be tuning those models a little bit more.
Yes and no. It's an interesting one, because I've read into this, not on this article, but previously. There's a number of factors that go into the type of packaging that's used. And it's not just what's in the box, because if you think about it, if you ship something that's in a box that's in the perfect shape for that box, and say it's a square thing and it fits quite neatly, but it gets bashed to all hell in transit and you have to send it back again, you've then tripled the carbon emissions for moving that product around, because it's got one set to go to the customer, another set to go back, and then a third set to send the correct one back again. So you're better off going for a slightly bigger piece of cardboard that can take a beating rather than it being the perfect size for the product. So that kind of explains that. Then there's the work that Amazon were famed for doing a little while ago about packing efficiency in the van, so that you can get more in it, because you've used, again, maybe it's not the perfect thing for the box, but it's a much more standardized shape, so you can fit things in the bags and in the sacks and in the vans a whole lot better. So there's that as well. So it's not quite as obvious as it says on the tin. Granted, yes, I've seen some really weird things where you've had like a packet of batteries in a box this big. Like, what was that about? But it's more complicated than it might seem.
My favorite weird delivery was going back. It's got nothing to do with Amazon. So I'm kind of going a little bit off topic. Sticking with the delivery issue. I remember we bought, I believe it was HP care packs for servers, which basically was like a license key. But this license key came printed on a piece of paper, inside a box, and we'd ordered multiple servers, so we needed multiple boxes containing multiple pieces of paper, which came in an enormous, great big box, which was shipped from South America. And I'm not kidding you. This box was about 3 feet by 2 feet. It contained about 20 medium-sized boxes, which, when you opened them, had packaging around a piece of paper with a license key on it, which was just
showing my age here. But you remember when you go to a shop and you'd buy, it was just about the time when CDs for software were being killed off, so it was all digital downloads, but you still went to a shop and you bought a DVD case that had a download key in it.
It couldn't change the production pipeline. I kind of the same way. I mean, it does seem curious, but when you do start thinking about it's not just the packaging, it's the transit, it's the human time, it's the all of the other things that go into it. I don't know this specifically. I always get a little bummed when I see all the plastic packaging that's inside of it, and I know that there's making sure that your cargo is safe inside that bigger box. I hate to see the inflated plastic. I don't know if that's. I'm sure it's reusable. I'm sure it's compostable or biodegradable. But it just feels weird. I feel like there's got to be a
getting better. That is getting better. Like the really big bubble wrap things that is biodegradable, and it's like 6 weeks or something, rather than the old fashioned lots of little teeny tiny bubbles. Which, as fun as that is to sit there and pop, it's not brilliant.
But you can now get reusable popping things. You get those little silicone ones where you can pop the bubble and it comes back again. So you don't actually need to,
so you don't need to actually have it.
Yeah.
It's like a reusable cup at that point.
Yeah, you can just get an app actually on your phone to do that. You're just going to sit there
tap your phone on it.
Popping bubbles. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very sustainable.
If the phone raises itself back up to meet your finger, I got to get one of those phones. Like that. That'd be wicked. I need one of those.
That's taken haptics to a new level. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, so the second way that Amazon's using the AI to build a more sustainable future is identifying damaged items to prevent waste. So
it's kind of much the same as the point I made about it being damaged in transit, but it's damaged before it goes out the door. Humans aren't infallible at seeing something that's been bashed around in the warehouse, and warehouses are not safe places. They're just not. I don't know if anyone, for the listeners that don't work in warehouses, warehouses are not safe places. Big forklifts running around all the place, and it's just, things get damaged and then they get put back on the shelf because someone's either well-meaning and didn't think it was damaged, or wanted to hide that they dropped it because they get in trouble, which is a reasonable thing to do. You're supposed to report it, but you'd get written up for it, so they hide it, which is, human nature. So again, if we can prevent this triple shipping effectively, more the better.
You think they're using something like recognition to be able to scan packages and then maybe determine just based upon, I don't know, damage, shape?
It'll be machine vision of some sort. Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah. Here's the correct item. Here's the item. Compare the two. Do they look the same? I guess that's kind of how it works.
There's some definite improvement.
Similar to what's going on in number 3, I guess, which is the monitoring produce to reduce food waste.
I just like that one because it's got mushrooms and AI in the same article, and I'm a fan of mushrooms. So I was like, when I was scrolling through, I was like, this is a really cool article. It's got mushrooms in it. So and fresh veggies. That one's curious to me because that one kind of goes back to like the content inspection too. Box inspection's one thing. We've gotten an increasingly large amount of, and I say increasing large amount, if like we get, I don't know, 10 Amazon packages delivered in a week, so 40 in a month. I don't know if it's that many, but maybe it is. There's a higher rate of defect that we've had to return back recently, like in the last 12 months, than what I traditionally remember. So I'm a fan if they can reduce that. But again, you're kind of item level inspection. Like, it's one thing, is the box good, but is the item good? And then food waste in determining how. I could get it like on a tomato, but I don't understand how you're going to tell if an avocado's, not good anymore, right? Because it's texture. So I don't know. I'm not sure that unless you've got something physical in that space that you'd be able to do that real well.
Well, this is referring specifically to Amazon Fresh rather than shipping anything. Which, as you say, for things like tomatoes or mushrooms or peppers or anything like that have a very visual
potatoes.
Let's call the whole thing off.
But it's potatoes now.
Oh dear. They visually degrade so you can do it with a camera. Brilliant. For things that degrade internally, or a potato being a good example, where unless it starts growing things, it will go sort of squidgy before it visually shows. So it's a texture thing. It's tricky. It's good that it's available for certain things because it means that your waste on apples goes right down. But
well, I'm kind of like picturing. Have you ever seen those like fair games with the little crane that hand?
Yeah.
I'm picturing like a crane with like sensors on its graspers to be able to do some kind of determination, because that's
squeezing an avocado.
Yeah, testing it out, or a potato before
Please stop doing that.
Before it puts it in your basket. But I mean, that is. I mean, like I'm bummed obviously when like I get one tomato that's bad out of like a group of like 15. Okay, that's a big deal. But like with avocados, like I mean, I may only order 3, and if they're all 3 bad, I mean that's a huge savings to be able to get that out. Especially if I'm looking at picking baskets to be able to sort for fresh. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting things about quality food processing in there that I think that AI could totally help with. And I'm not like this big AI fan, but I think that there's a lot of useful places there that you could do these checks quicker with probably a reasonable level of accuracy, as opposed to having a human sit there and do this over and over and over, which is really just a bad use of our time.
Absolutely. The fourth way that Amazon's using AI to help reduce or to improve sustainability is by helping customers find the perfect fit. And I have to say, this has just failed me. I think I need to send my running socks back to help retrain the model because my shoe size is right at the top of the small and at the bottom of the large, and it said go large, and I went large, and these new running socks are rubbing my feet like sandpaper. So I'm not sure this one's working particularly.
I've got a better solution.
Certainly in my
Don't run.
No socks.
Oh. Well, I could just not run. Yeah, I could run barefoot. Yeah, but there's a lot of stuff to step in around here that I don't really fancy.
You go natural. Go back to your original human roots and run barefoot.
Yeah.
On concrete.
Well, you have to get in the dirt to do that.
Yeah.
This one concerns me a little. I mean, I think it's interesting because I don't clothes buying on like. So my wife and I were at the store the other day. We were at Academy, which is a sporting goods store, and like I don't even know why we go to the store anymore. Like there are like products, they don't have their full array of products in a lot of stores. Academy does. They were really good, but there was another store that didn't. And I was like, why are we even at this store? Like, why don't just buy it online? And if we got into a point where it's like the purpose of the store and the physical space, but then you think about the waste, right? So like I can go and try on 3 pairs of running socks. But so what do you do to solve your running socks? Well, I'm gonna order 3 pairs of running socks on Amazon, and now they're gonna ship me 3. And now I've taken inventory on 2 things that I didn't need, and now I've got this return trip, and it's super, super wasteful. I don't know.
It's telling that department stores have a return option as ordered for choice. It's very telling because they know how many people do that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of room for improvement in this area, and I don't know. Reading the article, it sounds like they're trying to make some investments in it, but I don't know how you get around just physically being able to touch and put and adjust and test the item yourself or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think without having more detailed data about you as the purchaser, I think it's very difficult for AI to make any recommendations. How does Amazon's AI know which socks to recommend me?
If you hadn't bought any before either, right? Like what if you're a first-time buyer, or what if like New Balance don't fit the same way as Nike? This is a really far out thing, but it's almost like the next generation of some of this should be you would have a physical Amazon sizer. Like as an Amazon Prime subscriber, you can test out certain things so that you've got this kit so you could reduce. I mean, because
I've got this brilliant image now of a gentleman in an Amazon suit turning up and measuring you.
Yes.
Inside leg measurements then.
I was sticking with socks. But yeah, something along, there's got to be some kind of, I don't know, like this is really crossing over at that point, but it's like there's a lot of waste in this process.
Absolutely, you're right. But let's see. Hopefully, AI can help with that. Fifth one: measuring carbon footprint for products. Let's skip through these quickly. I'm conscious of time, but
nothing really to say there. Carbon footprint's important. It needs to be reported on in certain cases, so it can take as it says here, it can take a single person hundreds of hours to work it out for a single product. And that's what AI is quite good at, is just taking lots of big data sets and crunching that down to something vaguely meaningful. So that's good.
Preventing deforestation in Brazil by democratizing data. This seems like a pretty important use case for AI.
Yeah, I think anytime we can use computing to monitor things that are hard to monitor from down on the surface, I think is super helpful. I know we do a lot of this with animals and habitats and that sort of. I think that there's so many things that are happening that we don't see, that if AI can provide any insight to this stuff, I think the rainforest is irreplaceable, for like stating the obvious at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's a really, really good use for AI to be able to monitor and observe and kind of be above a level, almost like meta observation of areas. So I think it's cool.
And just to bring it back to AWS, because we've strayed quite a bit away from AWS, the last point in this article is about using AWS chips to power AI more efficiently. So obviously, all of these large language models have a huge compute requirement. Compute requires power to run it. So the more efficiently we can run that compute, the better. So anything to say on the AWS chips for AI?
So I'm not a hardware geek, but at the same time, like, this strategy by them, to use John's word, is brilliant. I'm trying to get my language correctly. So I do think it's brilliant. I think it's a great, what they did with leveraging, building their own chips to run their own infrastructure. I mean, that was just such an amazing investment that they've done. And I think it was extremely smart, especially when you're thinking about them building all of this well-connected infrastructure to be able to optimize around, right, their chipset. I just think it's a really, really smart move. And again, going back to all the different AI use cases, if they were doing all of this use case, but it was not net productive, right? They were creating more waste by trying to be sustainable in other areas. That would be kind of a bad move, right? So, but to actually be able to do some of this while also reducing their consumption and their compute power, I think is, I don't know, I think it's just really, really smart.
Nice. Anything to add, John?
Every time I see the word trainium, I just think of trains.
Thomas the Tank Engine now. I'm going way, way back.
Oh, my kids are about that sort of age, so
I know. It's popular in your house right now. Trains last until about 6.
Yeah. Well, not for some people, it's a lifelong obsession.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
I have real issues with Thomas the Tank Engine, because the whole thing, it's capitalist propaganda. It's all about being really useful. Okay.
On that note, we have reached the end of our time for season 3, episode 8 of Logicast. So if you managed to stick with us, thank you for listening. Thank you, John, as always, for your insights. And thank you, Ben, for joining us from Texas, where everything is bigger, apparently. So including the wind.
The wind.
So that was season 3, episode 8 of Logicast. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, please tell your friends about the podcast. You can download us from wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to see what we look like while we're talking to one another, we're also available on YouTube. We'll be back next week with another episode of Logicast for you. We'll see you again next time. Thank you.